You know those pristine grocery store vegetables that cost a fortune these days? Our grandparents would shake their heads because during the Great Depression, families survived on completely different crops that we've somehow forgotten about. These weren't fancy varieties, but incredibly resilient plants that produced food when nothing else would, stored without refrigeration, and grew in the poorest soil imaginable. After 40 years of gardening and researching historical growing methods, I've tracked down all 20 survival crops that kept families fed through America's darkest economic times. We're covering every single forgotten crop today, and wait until you hear about number 8, a multi-purpose plant that provided everything from sweetener to grain. Plus, I'll share a Depression-era storage secret at the end that requires zero electricity. The first forgotten crop that saved countless families is the rutabaga. And if you've never grown one, you're missing out on one of nature's most reliable survival foods. While everyone focuses on potatoes, rutabagas actually outperformed them during the Depression because they're practically indestructible in the garden. The American purple top variety can handle temperatures down to 20 degrees Fahrenheit and keeps producing when other root crops fail. What made rutabagas so valuable wasn't just their cold tolerance, it was their incredible storage ability. Families would pack them in sand or sawdust in their root cellars, and they'd stay fresh for 4 to 6 months without any refrigeration or special treatment. One medium rutabaga provides about 40% of your daily vitamin C, plus substantial calories when food was scarce. These roots actually taste better after a hard frost, developing a sweet, nutty flavor that made them a favorite in soups and stews. Growing them couldn't be simpler either. You can plant them in soil so poor that other vegetables won't even germinate, and they'll still produce roots weighing 2 to 3 pounds each. The Laurentian variety was especially prized because it resisted diseases that wiped out other crops. Smart Depression-era gardeners would succession plant rutabagas every 2 weeks through summer, ensuring fresh roots from fall straight through to the following spring. Jerusalem artichokes are probably the most underappreciated survival crop in American history, yet they kept entire communities fed when traditional agriculture failed. This native North American plant produces knobby tubers that taste like a cross between potatoes and water chestnuts. But here's what made them invaluable during hard times. Once you plant Jerusalem artichokes, they become a permanent food source that comes back stronger every single year without any help from you. The Stampede variety can produce 20 pounds of tubers from a single plant. And if you miss even one small piece when harvesting, it'll sprout into a new plant the following spring. Depression-era families called them survival insurance because they'd grow in clay, sand, or rocky soil where nothing else would survive. Unlike potatoes that can rot or develop diseases, Jerusalem artichokes are virtually pest and disease-free. They grow 6 to 10 feet tall, creating a natural windbreak that protected other crops. And their bright yellow flowers provided beauty during dark times. The red Fuseau variety was particularly valued because its smooth, red-skinned tubers were easier to clean and prepare. What most people don't realize is that Jerusalem artichokes contain inulin instead of starch, making them perfect for diabetics and providing sustained energy without blood sugar spikes. Families would harvest them all winter long, just digging through the snow whenever they needed fresh food, since the tubers actually taste sweeter after freezing in the ground. Collard greens became the backbone of southern survival gardens during the Depression, and there's a powerful reason they're still grown by families who remember those times. Unlike delicate lettuce or spinach, collards laugh at temperature extremes, producing thick, nutritious leaves when everything else in the garden has given up. The Georgia Southern variety can survive temperatures down to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, yet still produces through blazing summer heat that wilts other greens. What made collards indispensable was their incredible productivity from a small space. One plant keeps producing leaves for months, and you just harvest the outer leaves while the center keeps growing new ones. A single serving of collards provides more calcium than a glass of milk, plus vitamins A, C, and K that prevented the malnutrition diseases that plagued poor communities. Depression families would cook them with a ham hock or bacon grease when available, but even plain collards boiled with salt provided substantial nutrition. The Vates variety became popular because it's more compact, but equally productive, perfect for small victory gardens. These plants actually improve in flavor after frost, becoming sweeter and more tender, which meant fresh greens on the table, even in January. Southern gardeners developed a technique of banking soil around the stems in fall, which protected the plants through winter and forced tender new growth. Seeds cost practically nothing, and one packet could feed a family year-round if succession planted properly. Now, if you're finding this video interesting so far, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us reach more gardeners like yourself, who would also find it so helpful to avoid these mistakes. All right, let's keep going. Black-eyed peas deserve way more respect than they get in modern gardens because these humble legumes literally saved lives during the Depression. While other crops demanded rich soil and constant water, black-eyed peas thrived in the worst drought conditions imaginable, producing protein-rich food when meat disappeared from dinner tables. The California black-eye variety yields incredibly well, even in 100-degree heat, fixing nitrogen in the soil while producing both edible pods and dried beans. Smart gardeners discovered you could eat every part of the plant. Young leaves made nutritious greens, tender pods could be cooked like green beans, and mature dried peas stored for years without spoiling. 1 cup of cooked black-eyed peas provides 13 grams of protein, making them a complete meal when combined with cornbread. Depression-era families would plant them between corn rows, where they'd climb the stalks while enriching the soil for next year's crop. The Queen Anne variety was treasured because it matured in just 60 days, allowing multiple harvests in a single season. These plants laugh at poor soil, actually preferring sandy, well-drained conditions where other beans fail miserably. Southern families developed dozens of recipes using black-eyed peas, from Hoppin' John on New Year's Day to simple pea soup that could stretch for days. The dried peas became currency in some communities, traded for other necessities when money became worthless. Turnips pulled double duty in Depression gardens, providing both nutritious roots and vitamin-packed greens from a single seed. Most modern gardeners don't realize that turnip greens contain more nutrition than the roots themselves, with calcium, iron, and vitamins that prevented scurvy and rickets in malnourished children. The purple-top white globe variety matures in just 55 days, meaning families could grow multiple crops each year for continuous food supply. These incredibly hardy plants germinate in cold soil when it's too early for anything else, then keep producing through hard frosts that kill summer vegetables. 7 top turnips were specifically grown for their abundant greens, producing tender leaves just 3 weeks after planting. Depression-era cooks would simmer the greens with vinegar and a little fat, creating pot liquor that was drunk as a nutritious broth when food was scarce. The roots store beautifully in root cellars, lasting 4 to 5 months when packed in slightly damp sand or sawdust. What made turnips especially valuable was their ability to grow in exhausted soil where corn and beans had depleted nutrients. Farmers would broadcast turnip seeds in cornfields after the final cultivation, getting an extra crop without additional land or work. Young turnips can be eaten raw, providing fresh food when cooking fuel was precious, and the greens regrow after cutting if you leave the growing point intact. Mango beets might sound strange today, but these massive roots literally meant the difference between survival and starvation for many Depression-era families. Originally grown as livestock feed, desperate families discovered that mangoes were perfectly edible for humans, just not as sweet as regular beets. The Mammoth Red variety produces roots weighing 15 to 20 pounds each, with some giants reaching 30 pounds in good soil. One mango could feed a family for several meals, sliced and roasted, boiled in soups, or grated raw in desperate times. These incredible plants tolerate terrible growing conditions that would kill regular vegetables, thriving in heavy clay or sandy soil with minimal water. Depression farmers valued the yellow cylindrical variety because its shape made it easier to harvest and store, stacking like cordwood in root cellars. The leaves provided nutritious greens throughout the growing season, and smart gardeners would harvest outer leaves while the root continued growing enormous underground. Mangoes store for 8 months without any refrigeration, lasting from fall harvest clear through to the next summer's vegetables. German and Eastern European immigrants already knew their value, teaching American neighbors how to prepare them properly by peeling the thick skin and soaking slices in salt water. Some families even learned to make mango syrup, boiling down the roots into a sweet concentrate when sugar became an impossible luxury. Field peas aren't the same as English peas, and that confusion means most gardeners today miss out on one of the Depression's most important protein sources. These heat-loving legumes, also called cowpeas, saved Southern families when other crops shriveled in the summer heat and drought. The Dixie Lee variety produces abundantly, even in poor soil, while simultaneously adding nitrogen that benefits next year's garden. Iron clay cowpeas earned their name by growing in soil so hard and depleted that farmers joked you needed dynamite to plant them. Families ate field peas at every stage of growth. Young pods went into vegetable soup, green mature peas were shelled and cooked fresh, and dried peas stored indefinitely in cloth sacks. The plants themselves became valuable as hay for livestock or green manure when tilled under, improving soil structure dramatically. Depression-era farmers developed a system of interplanting field peas with corn and sorghum, creating a complete ecosystem where each plant supported the others. Unlike many legumes that quit producing after the first harvest, field peas keep flowering and setting pods until frost if you keep them picked. The dried peas could be ground into flour, stretching wheat flour when it became scarce or expensive. Some varieties, like iron clay, were specifically chosen because their hard seed coat resisted weevils and other storage pests that destroyed other stored foods. Sorghum changed everything for Depression families who thought they'd never taste sweetness again after sugar became a luxury they couldn't afford. This remarkable grain crop produces not just nutritious seeds for flour, but stalks filled with sweet juice that rivals sugarcane. The sugar drip variety lived up to its name, with stalks so full of sweet sap that it would literally drip from cut ends. Families would grow a small patch of sorghum and come together for community pressing days, running stalks through hand-cranked mills to extract the juice. That juice was then boiled down into thick, dark syrup that provided sweetness for cornbread, biscuits, and even coffee when times were really tough. The Dale variety was prized for dual-purpose use, providing both good syrup and abundant grain heads for flour or animal feed. Sorghum laughs at drought conditions that destroy corn, with roots that penetrate 6 feet deep to find moisture other plants can't reach. The grain itself is gluten-free and nutritious. Though Depression families didn't know about gluten, they just knew it made good porridge and could be popped like popcorn for a treat. Smart gardeners discovered that sorghum creates an effective windbreak, protecting more delicate vegetables while producing its own valuable crop. After extracting juice, the pressed stalks made excellent mulch or could be dried for winter fuel when firewood was scarce. Winter squash became the unsung hero of Depression survival, storing through entire winters without any refrigeration while providing vital nutrients when fresh vegetables were impossible memories. The Hubbard squash, with its thick, hard shell, would last 6 months sitting in a cool corner of the house, and one large squash could feed a family for a week. These plants produce abundantly, from just a few seeds, with vines that spread across unused ground or climb up fences, making use of space other crops couldn't utilize. The Burgess Buttercup variety was especially valued because its sweet, dry flesh tasted almost like sweet potato, providing comfort food when spirits were low. Depression families discovered that winter squash seeds were too valuable to waste, roasting them for a protein-rich snack that cost absolutely nothing. Smart gardeners would grow their squash on compost piles or manure heaps, where the rich nutrients produced massive fruits without taking up garden space. The thick leaves shaded the ground, conserving moisture and suppressing weeds that competed with other vegetables. When properly cured in the sun for 10 days after harvest, the shells hardened enough to protect the flesh inside like natural storage containers. Families would save the shells after eating the flesh, using them as bowls, water vessels, or even toys for children who had nothing else to play with during those difficult years. Parsnips confuse modern gardeners who don't understand why anyone would grow a vegetable that takes 4 months to mature. But Depression families knew exactly what they were doing. These cream-colored roots could stay in frozen ground all winter, actually becoming sweeter with each freeze-thaw cycle, providing fresh food in February when root cellars were running empty. The hollow crown variety develops roots 18 inches deep, mining nutrients from subsoil that other vegetables can't reach, thriving in spots where nothing else would grow. Depression era. Wisdom taught that parsnips planted in spring would be ready by Thanksgiving, but those left in the ground until spring became candy-sweet treasures. Harris model parsnips were favored because they produced thick, uniform roots that were easier to dig from frozen soil with hand tools. These overlooked vegetables provided complex carbohydrates and potassium when potatoes ran out or rotted in storage. Plus, their sweet flavor meant children would actually eat them without complaint. Clever cooks discovered parsnips could replace or stretch coffee when roasted and ground, creating a beverage that provided comfort if not caffeine. The plants are practically pest and disease-free, requiring no sprays or special care that Depression families couldn't afford anyway. Once established, parsnips self-sow readily, meaning 1 year's planting could provide food for years if you let some plants go to seed. Cabbage saved more lives during the Depression than any history book will tell you, providing vitamin C through winter when scurvy threatened malnourished families. The early Jersey Wakefield variety could be planted as soon as soil thawed, producing pointed heads before summer heat arrived, while late flat Dutch grew massive heads that stored until spring. Fresh cabbage lasted 3 to 4 months in root cellars, but the real magic happened when families made sauerkraut, preserving nutrients without any refrigeration or canning equipment. One large crock of fermenting cabbage could provide probiotics and vitamins for an entire winter, just salt and thyme transforming humble leaves into medicine. Depression families grew cabbage so densely that plants touched. Discovering this actually reduced pest problems and conserved garden space for other crops. The outer wrapper, leaves that modern shoppers never see, were saved for soup, nothing wasted when every calorie counted. Smart gardeners learned to stagger plantings 2 weeks apart, ensuring fresh cabbage from June through November, with stored and fermented cabbage lasting the rest of the year. Red cabbage was especially prized because it stored even longer than green varieties and added color to monotonous winter meals. Some families discovered that cabbage stumps left in the ground would sprout mini cabbages the following spring, providing early greens when nothing else was growing yet. Swiss chard deserves a medal for reliability, producing nutritious greens from early spring through hard frost, when most vegetables gave up after one season. The Ford Hook Giant variety develops thick white stems that can be cooked like celery, while the leaves provide greens more nutritious than spinach without bolting in summer heat. Depression families love chard because it's actually a beet that focuses on leaves instead of roots, meaning it tolerates poor soil and irregular watering that kills more demanding vegetables. Rainbow chard wasn't just about pretty colors. Each color provided slightly different nutrients, and the beauty lifted spirits during gray, difficult times. This cut-and-come-again crop meant one planting fed families for 6 months, just harvesting outer leaves while the center kept producing new growth continuously. Smart gardeners discovered chard would survive mild winters if covered with straw, providing fresh greens in February when nothing else was available. The stems could be pickled like cucumbers when harvest exceeded immediate needs, creating tangy additions to limited winter diets. Children who refused other vegetables would often eat chard because the colorful stems looked interesting, a psychological victory for parents struggling to provide nutrition. Swiss chard self-sows readily if you let one plant go to seed, meaning next year's crop was free, an important consideration when every penny mattered desperately. Kale was growing in depression gardens long before it became a modern superfood, valued by families who needed maximum nutrition from minimum space. The winter-bore variety survived temperatures that would destroy other greens, actually improving in flavor after each freeze turned starches into sugars. Red Russian kale provided not just nutrition, but visual variety in gardens and on plates. Its purple-tinged leaves reminding families that beauty could exist even in hardship. These plants are practically indestructible, surviving neglect, poor soil, and weather extremes that would kill pampered modern vegetables. Depression-era gardeners discovered kale would produce for 2 full years if you prevented it from flowering, making it the ultimate survival crop. One kale plant could provide weekly harvests for a family, with leaves regrowing quickly after each cutting if you left the growing center intact. The tough leaves that modern cooks complain about were actually an advantage, standing up to long cooking in soups and stews without disintegrating. Desperate families learned that kale chips, made by rubbing leaves with oil and salt, then drying them, provided a crunchy snack when fresh food was memory. Some varieties, like Red Russian, could be eaten raw when young, providing fresh salads in early spring when stored vegetables were exhausted. Kale's deep taproot brought up minerals from subsoil, actually improving garden soil while feeding families. Pole beans transformed from a simple garden crop into survival food when depression families learned to dry them for year-round protein storage. The Cherokee Trail of Tears variety carries a powerful history, saved by Native Americans during forced relocation and later keeping settlers alive through economic collapse. These climbing beans produce 3 times more than bush varieties in the same space, growing vertically on poles, strings, or corn stalks that serve double duty. Turkey craw beans got their unusual name from speckled seeds that resembled a turkey's crop, but their value came from incredible productivity and bulletproof storage capabilities. Dried beans stored in cloth sacks would last years without refrigeration, providing protein when meat became a distant memory for struggling families. A Depression-era wisdom taught that beans and cornbread together created complete protein, knowledge that saved countless children from malnutrition when animal products disappeared from tables. Smart gardeners discovered pole beans fixed nitrogen while growing, enriching soil for heavy-feeding crops planted afterward in the same spot. The green pods could be eaten fresh all summer, but the real insurance came from letting pods dry completely on the vine. Families would hold communal bean-shelling parties, making tedious work social, while children learned valuable skills and heard stories that connected them to better times ahead. Mustard greens grew like weeds in depression gardens, which was exactly the point when families needed food that required zero pampering or special care. Southern Giant curled variety provided spicy, frilly leaves that added flavor to bland meals, while the plants kept producing even in brutal summer heat. These greens mature in just 40 days from seed, allowing multiple plantings and continuous harvest when other crops took months to produce anything edible. Florida broadleaf mustard was treasured because its smooth leaves were easier to clean, saving precious water when every drop mattered during drought years. Depression families discovered mustard greens provided more vitamin A than almost any other vegetable, preventing night blindness that plagued malnourished communities. The plants self-sow aggressively if allowed to flower, meaning one purchase of seeds could provide greens indefinitely with no additional investment. Young leaves could be eaten raw in salads, mature leaves cooked down with whatever fat was available, and stems pickled like cucumbers for variety. Seeds from mature plants weren't just for replanting, they were ground into prepared mustard, providing condiments when store-bought items became impossible luxuries. Some families learned to use large mustard leaves as wrapping for other foods, like grape leaves, but available everywhere, stretching ingredients and adding nutrition simultaneously. Kohlrabi looks like something from another planet, but this weird vegetable saved depression families who needed fast food production from limited garden space. The early white Vienna variety produces baseball-sized bulbs just 50 days from planting, faster than almost any other substantial vegetable crop available. Purple Vienna. Kohlrabi wasn't just prettier, it was actually sweeter and stored longer. Important considerations when every harvest had to count multiple ways. These strange bulbs growing above ground confused garden pests that attacked underground root vegetables, providing reliable harvest when other crops failed to insects. Depression cooks discovered kohlrabi could be eaten raw like an apple, providing fresh food for children when cooking fuel was scarce, or summer. Heat made cooking unbearable. The leaves are completely edible too, doubling the food value from each plant and providing greens before the bulb was ready to harvest. Smart gardeners. Succession planted kohlrabi every 2 weeks, ensuring continuous harvest rather than feast or famine cycles that plagued poor planning. Storage was simple, lasting 2 to 3 months in root cellars, or the bulbs could be fermented like sauerkraut for longer preservation. German immigrant families taught neighbors that kohlrabi was actually cabbage bread for its stem, explaining why it was so nutritious and reliable. Okra might seem like an odd depression crop for anywhere outside the South, but this heat-loving vegetable provided food when everything else stopped producing in summer's worst. Clemson's spineless variety eliminated the irritating spines that made harvesting painful, a crucial improvement when children helped with garden work by necessity. Cowhorn okra produced pods 8 inches long that stayed tender, meaning fewer plants could feed more people from the same garden space. These African natives laughed at drought and 100-degree days that wilted tomatoes and beans, producing new pods every day once they started flowering. Depression families discovered every part of okra was useful. Young leaves went into soup, flowers were edible, and mature seeds could be roasted and ground as coffee substitute. The mucilaginous quality that some people dislike was actually prized for thickening soups and stews, stretching limited ingredients into filling meals. Pickled okra became a valuable trade item, with families exchanging jars for eggs, milk, or other necessities in cashless local economies. Smart southern gardeners learned okra would produce until frost if pods were harvested every other day. Missing even once meant tough, inedible pods. The dried pods made excellent fire starters, and the fibrous stems could be processed into rough cord, examples of how everything had multiple uses. Salsify completely disappeared from American gardens after the Depression, which is tragic, because this oyster plant provided unique nutrition and flavors when diets became monotonous. Mammoth Sandwich Island variety produced roots that really did taste like oysters when cooked properly, providing seafood flavor hundreds of miles from any ocean. These roots could stay in frozen ground all winter, just like parsnips, actually improving in flavor with each freeze, providing fresh food in March when stored vegetables were gone. Depression families valued salsify because it grew in poor soil where other root vegetables failed, and the grass-like foliage didn't attract pests that destroyed more obvious crops. The purple flowers that appeared on second-year plants were surprisingly beautiful, lifting spirits while producing seeds for next year's crop without spending money. Young shoots could be eaten like asparagus in spring. The roots provided oyster-flavored variety, and even the flower buds were edible, making this a three-purpose plant. Smart cooks discovered that salsify roots, when scraped and exposed to air, turned black unless dropped immediately in acidulated water, knowledge that separated successful meals from failures. The plant self-sows readily if allowed, naturalizing in meadow edges and providing food security that didn't depend on annual planting or purchased seeds. Ground cherries represent the kind of ingenious food solution depression families relied on, producing hundreds of sweet fruits that preserved themselves in papery husks. Aunt Molly's variety came from Polish immigrants who knew these golden berries would grow in poor soil and produce abundantly when traditional fruits were impossible dreams. The Cossack pineapple type actually tasted tropical, providing exotic flavors that transported families beyond their daily struggles, if only for a moment's sweetness. These low-growing plants spread across the ground, utilizing space under taller crops while producing fruit from midsummer until hard frost killed them. Depression-era children loved ground cherries because they fell to the ground when ripe, turning garden work into treasure hunting that made helping fun rather than chores. The husked fruits would store for months in cool, dry conditions, still in their natural wrappers that prevented spoilage better than any technology. Smart families discovered ground cherries made exceptional preserves with less sugar than other fruits required, stretching precious sweetener while providing vitamin C through winter. The plants self-sow aggressively from dropped fruits, meaning 1 year's planting could establish permanent patches that produced food without any additional work or expense. Some families learned to dry ground cherries like raisins, creating portable snacks that lasted indefinitely and provided energy for hard physical labor. Cardoon might be the most unusual crop on this list, but Mediterranean immigrant families knew this giant thistle relative provided food when nothing else would grow. Porto spineless variety eliminated the vicious thorns that made harvest dangerous, important when medical care was unavailable or unaffordable during economic collapse. Large smooth cardoons produce stems 3 feet long that, when properly blanched by wrapping with newspaper or burlap, became tender vegetables similar to artichoke hearts. These massive plants reach 6 feet tall and wide, producing enormous amounts of food from a single seed, though they required specific knowledge to prepare properly. Depression-era Italian families taught neighbors how to tie leaves together in fall, blanching the inner stems white and tender while removing natural bitterness. The flower buds could be eaten like artichokes, the roots were edible when cooked long enough, and even the seeds provided oil in desperate situations. Cardoons are perennials in zones 7 through 10, meaning one planting could provide food for years. A crucial consideration when buying seeds meant choosing between planting and eating. The blanching process took 3 weeks but transformed bitter, tough stems into delicacies that provided variety in monotonous depression diets. Smart gardeners discovered cardoon leaves made excellent mulch for other vegetables, their silver-gray color reflecting heat while suppressing weeds naturally. And now for the bonus tip gardeners swear by, a Depression-era storage secret that seems almost too simple to work, but literally prevented starvation through long winters. Families discovered they could create underground storage without digging root cellars by using what they called clamp storage, or earth pits. They'd pile root vegetables like turnips, rutabagas, and mangels directly on the ground in a pyramid shape, cover them with a thick layer of straw, then seal everything with soil, leaving just a small ventilation hole at the top covered with more straw. This created perfect storage conditions, maintaining constant temperature and humidity, while vegetables remained accessible all winter by opening one small section at a time. The Earth's natural insulation kept everything from freezing even in sub-zero weather, while the ventilation prevented rot that destroyed indoor storage. Families would make multiple small clamps rather than one large one, so opening one didn't expose all their food to spoilage. Some ingenious gardeners discovered that mixing different root vegetables in the same clamp actually improved storage, as certain vegetables gave off gases that helped preserve others. The beauty of this system was it cost absolutely nothing, required no building materials, and could be made anywhere, even in rented gardens, where permanent structures weren't allowed. This simple technique meant families could store thousands of pounds of vegetables through winter without any infrastructure, proving that survival often depends more on knowledge than resources. Thanks for sticking with me through the entire video. If you found this helpful, give it a like, subscribe for more gardening tips, and check out our other videos on growing a better garden.